In a world where light and shadow wage an eternal war, where the names of heroes become legends, and where ancient powers awaken once more, today, the candle of a great story will burn again. Night had settled softly over Rosgobel, wrapping the little woodland dwelling in a hush so gentle it seemed the world itself were holding its breath. Radagast the Brown, keeper of birds and beasts, moved quietly among his herb jars, preparing a soothing draught for a trembling hare that had arrived at his door at dusk. Yet even as he worked, his brow remained furrowed. All that day, and for many days before, an unease had lingered in the air like a whisper he could not quite hear. The birds had grown restless. The squirrels hid in their hollows long past sunrise. Even the hedgehogs, who feared little and complained much, hurried through the underbrush as though shadows chased them. Radagast had felt such silences before, in darker years and places, but never here, never in the gentle wilds he loved so dearly. Just as he finished cooling the draught, a faint scraping sounded at the door. Radagast turned, surprised. He had expected no visitor at this hour. He opened it gently, and in spilled a swirl of chill night air carrying a fragile, quivering shape. A thrush, feathers ruffled, breath rasping as though it had flown far beyond its strength. Radagast knelt at once, gathering the tiny creature into his hands. Its wings trembled, but its eyes, bright with pain and fear, fixed on him with desperate purpose. "What is it, little one?" he whispered, carrying it to the warmth of his lamp. "What sends you to me in such a state?" The thrush tried to speak, its voice a thin, strained churring. Radagast closed his eyes, listening with the deeper sense gifted to him long ago, hearing beneath the broken notes. At last, a message took shape in his mind, faint but clear enough to chill him. Something wakes beneath the roots. Beware the gray mists. Beware the forgotten forest. Radagast opened his eyes. His heart thudded once, heavy and certain. The forgotten forest lay to the east, beyond the gentle borders of Mirkwood, an old woodland seldom marked on maps and scarcely spoken of. The woodmen claimed their ancestors had once lived near its outer glades, but tales of strange vanishings and creeping fogs had driven them away centuries ago. In all his wanderings, Radagast had never taken more than a passing interest in it. It had always seemed merely quiet, withdrawn, content to be left alone. But now, mists, waking things? He set the thrush upon a soft cloth and offered it a sip of water. It shivered, gave a weak flutter, and managed another whisper of its spirit voice. The mists drive the beasts mad. They flee, but the fog follows. I barely escaped. Radagast touched the bird's head lightly. Rest now. You have done bravely. Outside, the wind shifted. A faint scent drifted through the open door, damp and stale, like old leaves rotting beneath untouched snow. Radagast stepped to the doorway and peered into the night. The moon shone pale through branches, but far to the east, he saw something that made him narrow his eyes, a low, creeping band of gray clinging to the treetops. Mist. In the dead of summer. He remained there a long moment, staff in hand, listening. The forest was silent. Utterly, unnaturally silent. At last, he closed the door and turned back inside. His path was already clear to him, though the thought of it weighed heavily. The forgotten forest was stirring. Something hidden, something long buried, was breathing again, and the mists, unnatural, unseasonal, unsettling, were spreading. Radagast gathered his satchel, filled it with herbs, powders, and dried roots of potency. He donned his weathered cloak, its pockets alive with murmuring mice and curious beetles, who peeked out at the sudden commotion. "No, friends," he murmured softly. "Stay here and keep watch. I must go alone this time." The creatures retreated, subdued. They too felt the strangeness. They too knew this was no mere wander to soothe a storm-broken nest or heal a fox's injured paw. Before departing, Radagast placed the thrush upon a cushioned nest by the hearth. The fire crackled softly, its warmth a promise of safety. "Rest. When I return, I shall see you healed." But as he stepped outside and closed the door behind him, he wondered, quietly, privately, whether the promise was one he would be able to keep. The wind rustled the branches above. The night seemed to hold its breath once more. Radagast lifted his staff, set his feet upon the path eastward, and began the journey toward the mists rising from the forgotten forest, unaware that the forest had already sensed his coming. Dawn had not yet broken when Radagast reached the outer eaves of the forgotten forest. A dim gray light clung to the horizon, neither night nor morning, as though the world hesitated to rise. The air grew colder with every step, and the earthy sense of moss and pine slowly faded beneath another smell: damp stone, stale fog, and something older still, like air trapped in a sealed chamber for an age untold. The path narrowed as the trees pressed close, their boughs leaning inward as if to whisper secrets to one another. No bird greeted him with morning song. No fox darted across his path. Even the insects, ever humming and rustling, were absent. Radagast felt the hush settle on his shoulders like a weight. Just ahead, he saw the first fingers of the rising mist drifting between the trunks. It curled low around the roots, pale and sluggish, as if searching for prey. He tapped the end of his staff lightly on the ground. "Easy now," he murmured to himself. "Let us see what you hide." He stepped forward, and the forest changed. The air thickened, the trees loomed darker. The mist swallowed sound so quickly that Radagast heard his own breath more clearly than the rustle of his cloak. Yet he sensed something beneath it all, a faint thread of life, the forest's own spirit struggling against the creeping fog. Then, from somewhere deeper within, a distant thudding reached his ears. Slow, uneven, the sound of something moving, or something stirring. Radagast tightened his grip on his staff. "I come only to see and to heal," he whispered. "Let no harm befall me, and none shall be given." But the mist gave no answer. He pressed on, following a narrow deer trail that wound between ancient oaks and leaning beeches. Their bark was scarred with deep, jagged marks, fresh ones carved only days ago. Radagast studied them carefully. The gouges were long and curved, not claws, not teeth. Something else. Something that had raked across the trees as it passed, not to feed or fight, but to feel its way through the dark. He straightened slowly. "This forest shelters more than beasts," he murmured. A soft rustle behind him made him turn sharply. From the mist emerged a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, and cloaked in the leathers of the woodman. A bow hung at his side, but his hands were empty, raised slightly to show peace. "Well met, Radagast the Brown," the stranger said quietly. "You walk a perilous path." Radagast recognized him then. LOTR, a hunter who roamed the eastern borders. The man's brown hair was damp with mist, and his eyes bore the strain of several sleepless nights. "You have followed the fog," Radagast said. "Aye," LOTR answered. "My people fear it. 3 hunters have not returned from these woods, yet no beast tracks lead back to their homes. Only this mist." His voice lowered. "It whispers at night. I have heard it." Radagast studied the man, wary but resolute. Then perhaps we should walk together. This forest may hold dangers better faced by two." Lothar nodded, relieved though too proud to say so. "I will guide you as far as I can, but if the forest twists again—" "Twists?" Radagast asked. Lothar motioned ahead. "The paths change, trees move, or so it seems. A man walks in circles without ever turning." His hand tightened slightly at the memory. "I marked the trunks with my knife. When I passed again, the marks had shifted." Radagast felt a ripple of unease. Illusions were one thing, but a forest bending itself. That hinted at a deeper force. Together they walked on, braving the creeping hush. As they moved deeper, the mist thickened until even the nearest branches blurred to pale smudges. The ground sloped downward, the roots growing thicker and more tangled, as though reaching for the heart of the forest. Then the air trembled. A low vibration ran through the earth, subtle but unmistakable. Lothar stiffened, hand instinctively moving toward his bow. Radagast held his staff before him. "Do not flee," he whispered. "Whatever wakes here listens for fear." Another tremor answered him, heavier this time. Leaves shuddered. A moss-covered stone tumbled down a rise behind them. From the mist ahead, a shape began to form. At first it seemed like a wolf, four-legged, low to the ground, sinewy as a starving creature. But as it emerged fully into view, Radagast felt his breath catch. Its eyes glowed a sickly pale. Its fur was mottled with shadows that writhed as if alive. When it opened its jaws, no breath escaped, only a thin curl of gray mist. The creature stepped forward, silent as a ghost. Lothar lifted his bow. "By the valor," he breathed. "What is it?" Radagast raised a hand. "Not a wolf, something corrupted." He faced the creature with calm he did not entirely feel. "It is shaped by the mists." The beast crouched. Radagast struck his staff upon the earth. A warm, amber light flared at its tip, cutting through the fog. The creature recoiled, snarling without sound. The shadows along its flanks shriveled as though burned. "Back!" Radagast commanded. For a heartbeat, the beast hesitated. Then it lunged. Lothar loosed an arrow. Radagast swept his staff upward. Light met shadow in a brief, blinding clash. The creature screamed, high, thin, unnatural, and burst into a cloud of gray vapors that dissolved into the mist. Silence rushed back in. Lothar stood frozen, bow shaking slightly in his hands. "What manner of evil is this?" Radagast exhaled slowly. "Something ancient, stirring beneath these woods. This was but a fragment, shaped from fear and fog." Lothar swallowed hard. "Then what lies at the heart of this forest?" Radagast looked into the swirling depths of the mist. The tremor beneath the earth had faded, but the memory of it lingered in his bones. "I do not yet know," he said softly, "but it waits for us, and it is waking." The forest grew darker, though the morning sun should have been rising. Radagast felt the faint glow of daylight somewhere beyond the mist, but here, beneath the tightly woven branches, an eerie twilight clung to every path. Lothar walked at his side, moving with the careful steps of a hunter, yet even he could not hide his unease. The battle with the mist creature had shaken him, though he tried not to show it. They pressed deeper, following the faint slope of the land as it dipped toward the ancient heart of the wood. The silence tightened around them until every footfall seemed far too loud. Radagast paused often to touch a root or brush his hand against leaves turned brittle by some unseen force. Each time his frown deepened. "This forest is not dying," he murmured at one point. "It is resisting." as though the very trees struggle against a sickness spreading through their roots. Lothar glanced over his shoulder, studying the trunks that leaned inward like wary sentinels. "It feels as though they watch us." "They do," Radagast said simply, but not with fear, with warning. They had walked nearly an hour when Lothar halted abruptly and raised a hand. Radagast followed his gaze. To their left, half hidden behind a slumping curtain of vines, stood a stone pillar. It rose from the earth like the broken tooth of some ancient beast, weathered and cracked, yet unmistakably shaped by hands long gone. Lothar approached it slowly. "A marker stone," he breathed. "I've seen drawings of such pillars in the records of my people. They once marked the old woodman settlements before they fled this forest." Radagast followed him, brushing moss from its surface. Faded carvings emerged, spirals, runes, and the stylized shape of a well. The sight made Radagast's breath catch. "A well," he murmured. The thrush spoke of something beneath the roots, something waking. Lothar stepped back from the stone, unease shadowing his face. "My grandfather told tales of an old well near the forest's center. It was said to have been sealed by our ancestors. He never spoke of what they sealed away." He shook his head. "I thought it naught but a fireside tale." "Most tales hold a kernel of truth," Radagast said, tapping the pillar lightly with his staff. "And this one may be larger than most." A faint tremor rippled through the ground beneath them, so subtle that only Radagast felt it. He turned eastward. "The well lies ahead," he said quietly. They continued, now with greater caution. The mist thickened in patches, pooling in hollows and drifting low across the path, as though drawn toward some hidden source. Radagast tested it with the tip of his staff. The vapors recoiled from the faint glow, shivering as though alive. "This is no natural fog," he said. "It carries a will." After another stretch of uneasy silence, they reached a clearing, not wide, but unmistakably deliberate. The trees encircled it like the walls of an abandoned hall. In the center lay a depression in the earth, overgrown with vines and moss. A stone rim rose from its center, half collapsed and choked with roots. The ancient well. Lothar whispered a soft curse under his breath. "I never believed it existed." Radagast approached the ruined structure with slow, reverent steps. The stones were old, older than the woodman, older perhaps than the first shadows that had crept over Greenwood the Great. He felt a throb of energy pulsing from deep within, faint, yet unmistakable. A presence dwelled below. Something watched him from beneath the earth. "Stand back," Radagast said gently. Lothar obeyed without question. Radagast knelt at the well's rim, brushing away tangled vines. Beneath the growth, he uncovered a flat stone slab fitted into the opening. Cracks spidered across its surface. It was sealed indeed, he murmured, and sealed by those who knew fear. A sudden gust of cold wind swept the clearing. The mist surged inward, swirling around them like searching fingers. Lothar's bow was in his hands in an instant. From the edge of the clearing came a faint growl, low, guttural, and close. More shapes emerged from the mist. Wolves, 3, then 4, then 6, each twisted like the first creature they had faced. Their eyes glowed with that same sickly light. Their fur rippled with shadows that did not belong to any living thing. Radagast rose swiftly. "They guard the well," he said, "or are driven to it." Lothar drew an arrow. "Radagast, can you hold them?" "I shall try." The wolves crept closer, circling, their movements silent as drifting smoke. Then the largest of them, A brute with gnarled fur and teeth blackened like iron lunged. LOTR's arrow struck it square in the flank. The creature staggered but did not fall. Radagast raised his staff, summoning a warm, golden light that burst outward in a sweeping arc. The wolves shrieked, dissolving into clouds of vapor before reforming at the clearing's edge, snarling anew. "They cannot be slain," LOTR said, voice tight. "They are bound to the mists," Radagast answered, "but light weakens them." He struck the earth with his staff again. A pulse of power rippled through the clearing, clearing a circle around the well. For a moment, the wolves faltered, yet something deeper awakened in response. From beneath the well came a soft, echoing thud, then another, a rhythmic beating, like the heartbeat of some ancient creature slowly stirring after a long slumber. Radagast felt the earth tremble beneath his feet. The slab covering the well shifted slightly, dust sifting down its edges. LOTR stared at it, eyes wide. What lies down there?" Radagast did not answer at once. He placed a hand upon the stone, feeling the tremor beneath. A chill spread through him, not of fear, but of grim understanding. "A spirit," he whispered, "one that was cast down long ago, not of the valor nor of the great Maiar, a lesser fragment, a broken thing, but dangerous still." The slab shuddered again. The wolves cried out suddenly, not in threat, but in pain. Their shapes wavered, as if pulled by an unseen force. The mist thickened, swirling toward the well like water sucked down a drain. "Radagast," LOTR said, backing away. "We must leave." "No," Radagast said quietly. "This awakening must be stopped. If it breaks free, it will corrupt the forest far beyond these borders." A crack rang through the clearing as the slab shifted once more. Radagast lifted his staff. "Stand ready, LOTR. The forest has held this darkness at bay for centuries. Now we must hold it back." The final crack split the air, and the stone seal began to give way. The stone slab shuddered, then shifted with a grinding groan that echoed through the clearing like the moan of something long imprisoned. Radagast stepped back, staff raised, as a thin crack widened across the ancient seal. From within that crack seeped a dark vapor, denser than the drifting mist around them, tinged with a dull, sickly red. The wolves quailed at its touch, shrinking away with whimpers that sounded more like the wails of lost spirits than the cries of beasts. LOTR drew another arrow, though his knuckles were white around the bowstring. "Radagast," he whispered, "if that stone breaks—" "It will break," Radagast answered, his voice steady, though his heart thrummed with unease. "Our task is to keep what lies beneath from escaping fully." Another tremor rolled through the earth. The trees around the clearing groaned, their branches sagging as though weighted by a sudden dread. Moss flaked from their bark, falling in dusty clumps. The roots beneath Radagast's boots shifted slightly, as though the forest itself recoiled. A deep thump rose from below, the beat of something ancient and terrible stretching its strength. Then the crack split fully, and the slab slid aside with a heavy final scrape. From the darkness below came a single exhale, a long, whispering breath that seemed to steal warmth from the air. The wolves threw back their heads and howled without sound. Their glowing eyes flickered. Then, in a rush, they dissolved into smoke and fled into the fog like frightened shadows, leaving Radagast and LOTR alone before the yawning mouth of the well. LOTR swallowed hard. "It has driven its own servants away." "No," Radagast murmured. "They were not servants. They were shackles. The mist bound them to its will." He stepped forward, peering into the opened well. The shaft descended far below sight, its inner stone slick with age and dark residue. The air rising from it was colder than winter wind, yet beneath the chill he felt a pulse, slow, uncertain, but growing stronger. LOTR stood at his side. "What do you see?" "Not the creature itself," Radagast said, "only the shadow of its waking." He lifted his staff, calling forth a gentle radiance. Warm gold spilled downward into the well, illuminating the first few yards of the descent. But the light faltered. It dimmed. Then the shadows swallowed it whole. Radagast's jaw tightened. It resists. The ground trembled again, the vibration stronger this time. LOTR staggered but steadied himself quickly. From deep below came a faint scraping, like claws or broken stone shifting in the dark. Radagast lowered his staff. "LOTR, listen carefully. We cannot let it rise to the surface. If it were to escape into the open forest, the corruption would spread beyond these borders. The mists would reach the woodman's lands, then the Anduin, and perhaps further still." The hunter nodded, though his eyes showed fear he dared not voice. "What must we do?" "We must descend," Radagast said softly. "Down into the well." LOTR stared at him. "Into that darkness?" "Yes." Silence settled between them, broken only by the soft groans of ancient roots shifting under strain. LOTR looked once at the fog curling around the clearing, then back at Radagast. "I follow," he said at last. "My people have lived in fear of these woods for generations. If this darkness can be ended, I will not turn away." Radagast placed a hand on the man's shoulder, an acknowledgement of courage rarely spoken aloud. "Then let us begin." The descent was not a simple climb. Roots, thick as a man's arm, formed a tangled network against the inner wall of the well. Stones jutted like broken teeth. The air grew colder as they climbed downward, until breath fogged before their faces. With each footfall, the tremors grew softer, yet the sense of some immense slumbering presence grew stronger, pressing against their thoughts like a whisper that refused to take shape. Halfway down, Radagast paused. A faint reddish glow emanated from below, pulsing at intervals, as though matching the slow beat of a heart. LOTR followed his gaze. "That light," he murmured. "It is not light," Radagast said. "It is its will." They continued downward until the shaft widened into a chamber, the forgotten underground hall of the ancient woodman. The place was vast, though partly collapsed, and the air shimmered with drifting vapors lit faintly by the reddish pulse. Old carvings lined the stone walls, scenes of hunts, of feasts, of families gathered around a central well. But those days were gone. Roots pierced the ceiling, long fallen stones littered the floor, and at the center lay a sunken hollow from which the red glow seeped. Radagast stepped lightly onto the chamber floor. The mist shifted around him, swirling as though recognizing his presence. LOTR joined him, bow drawn. A faint whisper rose from the hollow. Not words, not yet, just a stirring of intent, ancient and cold. Radagast approached slowly, raising his staff so that its warm light pushed the mist aside. Then he saw it. In the hollow lay a dark shape, half shadow and half form, its body like a tattered cloak draped over nothingness. It pulsed faintly, drawing the mist inward. Tendrils of vapor curled from its edges, reaching upward, searching. LOTR's voice was barely a breath. "What is it, Radagast?" "A fragment," Radagast said quietly. "A remnant of a lesser spirit that fled into hiding during the wars of ages past. Severed from its master, it sank beneath these roots. The woodmen sealed it, thinking it merely an ill spirit. They could not know what it truly was." The shadow stirred at the sound of Radagast's voice. Two faint, formless pits opened, like eyes that were not eyes, fixing upon him. A whisper trailed through the chamber, sharp as cold metal on stone. "Free. Free." Radagast tightened his hold on his staff. "No," he said firmly. "You shall not leave this place." The shadow recoiled, then surged upward with sudden speed. A blast of cold struck the chamber, sending stones skittering and roots tearing from the walls. LOTR was thrown to one knee. Radagast braced himself, driving the end of his staff into the ground. Golden light burst outward, forming a barrier around them. The shadow hissed at the glow, its form writhing. LOTR rose, gripping his bow. "Tell me how to fight it." "You cannot," Radagast said, "but you can aid me." "How?" Radagast's eyes remained fixed on the rising form. "We must bind it once more. The seal must be restored, but with greater strength. I require time." LOTR nodded without hesitation. "Then I will hold it off." The hunter stepped forward, loosing an arrow. The shaft passed through the shadow, but left a ripple of golden light behind. The enchantment Radagast had placed upon it earlier. The creature shrieked, turning its formless gaze toward LOTR. Radagast lifted his staff high. "Keep its attention. Do not let it sense what I prepare." LOTR drew again, loosing arrow after arrow, each one laced with Radagast's light. The chamber filled with flickers of gold and curls of shrieking shadow. Meanwhile, Radagast knelt by the hollow, drawing signs of warding in the dust with the tip of his staff. Each mark glowed faintly, forming a ring around the creature's lair. His voice rose softly, ancient words, older than the forest, older than the mountains. The air trembled with power, but the shadow sensed the shifting magic. With a furious wail, it surged upward, scattering the arrow's glow. LOTR shouted a warning. "Radagast!" The wizard rose, staff blazing. "Stand firm!" The creature lunged, and the chamber shook as though the roots of the forest groaned in fear. And thus, the true battle for the Forgotten Forest began. The chamber trembled as the shadow rose, its form unfurling like a torn banner caught in a storm. Tendrils of mist lashed outward, striking the stone walls with sharp cracks that echoed through the ancient hall. LOTR braced himself against the force, teeth clenched as he loosed another arrow, the shaft bursting in a flash of pale gold as Radagast's enchantment flared. The creature reeled back from the light, but not for long. Its form thickened, feeding on the mists that curled down from cracks in the ceiling. Each breath it drew seemed to strengthen it, darkening the vapors into swirling coils of shadow. Radagast held his staff before him, the tip glowing like a captured dawn. The ring of runes he had drawn around the hollow flickered, struggling to remain whole as the creature's presence pressed against them. He felt the strain deep in his bones, like roots buckling beneath a storm. "LOTR!" he called. "Circle wide. Keep to the edge. Let it chase you, not the rooms." The hunter obeyed without hesitation. He darted along the outer wall, moving with agile, practiced steps. Though his breath grew ragged, his aim never faltered. Each arrow struck the creature with a burst of light that forced it to twist and lash its tendrils toward him. The shadow surged after LOTR, its movements swift and unnatural. It swept across the chamber like a storm cloud, trailing cold and dread. LOTR dove behind a fallen stone pillar as a tendril whipped past, slicing the air with a hiss sharp enough to chill the blood. Radagast seized the moment. He knelt and pressed his palm to the earth, whispering words that thrummed with ancient strength. The runes blazed brighter, thin lines of gold weaving together, forming a lattice of light that began to rise from the ground. The creature sensed the shift instantly. It turned from LOTR with a shriek that rattled the very stones. Its shadowy limbs lashed downward, striking the runes with a force that sent sparks of golden fire flying. The lattice shuddered, flickering dangerously. Radagast gritted his teeth. "Hold, old magic. Hold a little longer." The creature hurled itself again, the impact sending a tremor through the chamber. A crack split the far wall. Dust rained from above. LOTR stumbled to Radagast's side. "The whole hall will collapse." "Then our task must end before it does," Radagast replied, rising with a grim resolve. The glow from his staff intensified, spreading down the wood like liquid sunlight. The creature recoiled, but the mist answered its call, swirling protectively around it. Red sparkles pulsed within the vapors, faint at first, then brighter, like embers in a dying fire suddenly fanned back to life. Radagast's eyes narrowed. It draws upon its ancient nature. That ember must be extinguished or bound forever. LOTR knocked another arrow. "What must I do?" Radagast pointed toward a cluster of fallen stones. "There, break the vines beneath them. The sealing stone lies buried. If we can lift it, I may anchor the binding to it." LOTR sprinted toward the stones without another word. The shadow lunged to intercept. Radagast thrust his staff forward, unleashing a wave of golden light that struck the creature squarely. The blast echoed like thunder, scattering the mist and driving the shadow back, but the effort drained him. He staggered, leaning heavily on the staff as the glow dimmed. The creature gathered itself again, rising taller, its outline warping into twisting limbs and yawning voids. It hissed, a sound filled with hunger and fury. Radagast steadied himself. The runes still glowed beneath his feet, but their hold weakened with each heartbeat. He could not fail now, not when the forest's safety hung upon these final moments. LOTR reached the fallen stones, dropping to one knee as he hacked at the thick vines with his hunting knife. Each slice exposed more of the ancient carvings beneath, spirals and symbols shaped by hands long dead. "Hurry!" Radagast cried. The shadow swept toward the hunter. Radagast slammed his staff into the ground. A crack of golden energy shot across the floor, intersecting the creature's path and halting it mid-surge. For a moment its form froze, black mist writhing as if in agony. "LOTR! The stone! Now!" With a final heave, the hunter tore the last vine free. Beneath it, an oblong slab of polished gray stone lay half buried in the earth. Old runes glimmered faintly on its surface. Radagast felt a surge of relief. "Good. Stand clear." LOTR rolled aside just as Radagast raised his staff high. The light around him flared, wrapping him in a warm, golden aura that pushed back the creeping chill. Drawing on the strength of the forest, the lingering breath of ancient roots, the memory of sunlight through leaves, he spoke words that rang with power. The runes on the stone blazed. The creature shrieked, flailing as the lattice of golden light rose higher, forming a cage around it. The chamber shook. Stones tumbled from the ceiling. Roots snapped like cords. LOTR shielded his head. "Radagast! The ceiling! Do not lose heart!" Radagast cried, though sweat beaded his brow. "Just a moment more!" The shadow writhed violently, slamming against the glowing bars. Each impact sent cracks through the lattice, but it held, barely. The red ember at the creature's core pulsed with furious intensity, fighting against the binding. Radagast thrust the staff downward. Golden light surged through the chamber, racing across the floor and into the ceiling stone. The runes ignited in a blaze of white heat. The lattice tightened, drawing the shadow toward the stone, pulling it down inch by inch. "No!" The creature's whispering voice echoed, thin, desperate, furious. Radagast pressed harder, his whole being focused upon the binding. The air vibrated, the mists recoiled. Even the roots above seemed to quiver in anticipation. The shadow's form collapsed inward, shrinking, folding, twisting upon itself. Its tendrils snapped into vapor. The red ember sputtered, dimmed, and with a final wail, the creature was drawn into the stone. Silence fell. The glow faded from Radagast's staff. The trembling of the earth quieted. Dust drifted lazily through still air, settling over the collapsed stones. Radagast sagged forward, breath shallow. LOTR caught his arm, steadying him. "Is it done?" the hunter asked softly. Radagast nodded, though his voice came weakly. "For now, it is bound again. But the seal must be restored fully, lest it stir once more." LOTR looked around the ruined chamber. "The path above us may not last much longer." "Then we must hurry," Radagast said, lifting his staff with renewed purpose. "The forest waits for its healing, and we have little time to grant it." Dust still hung in the air like drifting ash as Radagast and LOTR stood over the sealing stone, its runes glowing faintly in the dim, cavernous chamber. The echo of the shadow's final wail still lingered in the stones, trembling through the ancient hall like the last note of a distant horn. Though the creature had been drawn back into the depths of the stone, Radagast felt no triumph, only the weight of unfinished work pressing upon him. The chamber groaned softly overhead. A crack split along one of the curved walls, sending pebbles tumbling across the floor. LOTR lifted his gaze anxiously. "The whole place is ready to come down on our heads. Tell me we can leave." "We will," Radagast said, though his voice carried a weary heaviness. "But the seal must hold. If even a thread of its spirit escapes, the mists will rise again." LOTR sheathed his knife and knelt beside the stone. "Just tell me how to help. I've no skill in magic, but I'll not leave this forest to danger." Radagast took a long breath, gathering his strength. "The binding is weak. It must be anchored to the roots above, woven into the forest's own life. Only then will the seal endure the ages." He lifted his staff. A faint glow returned to its tip, dim at first, but steady. He knelt and placed his free hand flat upon the sealing stone. At his touch, the runes brightened, pulsing gently like a sleeping heartbeat. "LOTR," he said quietly, "lay your hand upon the stone as well." The hunter hesitated only a moment before doing so. A soft hum rose through the stone, warm, steady, ancient. LOTR's eyes widened in surprise as he felt the pulse beneath his palm, as though the spirit trapped within stirred faintly. "Do not draw back," Radagast warned. "This is the forest lending its strength. The shadow is chained. It can do you no harm now." Radagast closed his eyes, murmuring in an older tongue than the woodman would ever know. The air shifted. The roots curling down the walls seemed to straighten, tense with awareness. Light seeped from the runes and climbed the roots like veins filled with golden ichor. Above them, the ceiling cracked again, but this time it was not collapse. The roots pushed upward, widening cracks, forcing their way into the soil above. The forest itself responded to the call, awakening to mend the wound in its depths. LOTR stared upward in awe. "I've never seen the forest move like this." "It remembers," Radagast whispered. "Once it guarded its children well. Long before the shadow's corruption, these roots held watch over the woodman's earliest homes." The light spread, rising with every heartbeat. Radagast felt the forest's life deepen around him, like the embrace of old friends awakening from slumber. The seal drank that strength eagerly. The runes glowed brighter, first gold, then white, then a deep, warm amber. At last, With a resonant thrum, the light sank into the stone and stilled. The runes etched across its surface shone with renewed brilliance. "It is done," Radagast said softly. He removed his hand, swaying a little. Lothar caught him at once. "Easy. You look worn to the bone." "It takes much," Radagast murmured, "to bind a spirit even so diminished as this one. Yet it is safe now, safer than when the woodmen sealed it in their fear." A faint rumble answered his words, as though the chamber itself breathed out in relief. The oppressive tension in the air waned. The mist that clung to the lower shadows thinned and retreated toward the cracks from which it had seeped. Lothar let out a long breath. "Then let us return to the surface. I would see the sky again." "As would I," Radagast admitted. They crossed the chamber to the well's interior, where roots formed a rough ladder. Radagast went first, leaning heavily on his staff as he climbed. The ascent was slow. More than once, Lothar braced him when the walls trembled or the roots shifted beneath their footing, but gradually, the reddish pulse faded behind them, replaced by the pale gray of the natural mists above. When Radagast reached the top of the well and pulled himself out, the first light of day greeted him, dimmed by the fog, yet unmistakably dawn. Lothar climbed out after him, rolling onto the soft earth with an exhausted groan. "If I never see another underground hall, I will die content." Radagast chuckled quietly. "Let us hope that day lies far off." But the clearing around them had changed. The mist was thinning, retreating in shreds like torn cloth. The trees that encircled the well stood straighter. Their bark seemed less dull, the leaves less brittle. The air smelled fresher, still cold, still heavy with the scent of stone and old magic, but lacking the suffocating dread that had haunted it before. A squirrel darted from a branch, chittering irritably, as though waking from a long and unwanted sleep. Lothar blinked in astonishment. "Life returns," Radagast said with satisfaction. "The forest heals itself quickly when allowed." Yet even as hope stirred, Radagast's expression grew thoughtful. Still, the corruption lingered longer than I expected, and that shadow, though weak, was not newly formed. Lothar brushed dirt from his hands. "What do you mean?" "This fragment fled here ages ago," Radagast explained, pacing slowly around the well. "But something stirred it. Something breathed new strength into it." The hunter frowned. "But nothing lives deeper than the roots. Nothing of this world," Radagast said quietly. He lifted his gaze eastward. Though the trees were still shrouded in mist, the forest seemed clearer now, less hostile, more watchful than afraid. "There are forces moving beyond our sight," he murmured. "Darkness stretches its fingers far across Middle-earth. Even small shadows begin to wake." Lothar tightened the strap of his quiver. "If this is but a sign of what is to come, I fear for my people." "Fear not," Radagast said, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You have shown great courage this day, and the forest is safer now because of you." Lothar gave a faint smile. "What now?" "Now," Radagast said, "we guide this forest back to light. The shadow may be sealed, but its breath touched the roots. There is work yet to be done." They turned westward, toward the long path back. The morning mist parted before them, not in fear, but in recognition, drifting aside as though granting passage. Behind them, the well lay sealed once more. The golden runes on the stone gleamed faintly, like embers beneath cool ash, watchful, patient, waiting should they ever be needed again. Radagast lifted his staff, and together they stepped into the quiet forest, unaware that their task was far from finished. The forest greeted them with a hush unlike the suffocating silence from before. This quiet was natural, peaceful, as though the trees themselves paused to breathe after a long and troubled night. Radagast stepped lightly across the soft earth, his staff tapping gently at his side, while LOTR followed close behind, still glancing over his shoulder as though expecting the mists to gather anew. They did not. The fog thinned steadily, curling upward into the branches and dispersing like smoke from a dying fire. Here and there, birds tested their voices, tentative chirps and warbling notes that drifted through the awakening woods. A fox peeked from behind a log, sniffed at the clean air, then darted away with a flick of its tail. "It truly is lifting," LOTR said, more to convince himself than Radagast. "I had not believed the forest would clear so quickly." "Shadow retreats swiftly when its root is severed," Radagast answered. "Yet not all wounds heal without scar." He paused beside a fallen beech, its bark blackened where the mist had clung longest. Radagast brushed his fingers across it. The wood crumbled softly beneath his touch. LOTR frowned. "Will the tree recover?" "No," Radagast murmured. "This one has stood through many winters, but the shadow marked it too deeply. Still, for one tree to fall that a forest might stand, that is no ill price." He straightened, leaning momentarily upon his staff. Fatigue settled into his limbs like a leaden cloak. The binding had drained him far more than he wished to admit. LOTR noticed and stepped closer. "How much farther to Rosgobel?" "A day's journey," Radagast replied. "If the forest is kind." LOTR gave a faint, wry smile. "After all this, I think it owes us a bit of kindness." The path wound between ash and oak, then dipped into a shallow hollow where the mist still clung in faint, ghost-like ribbons. Radagast slowed immediately, raising his staff. The glow at its tip brightened, pushing back the lingering haze. "This place," LOTR whispered. "I do not know it." "It is not a place meant to be known," Radagast said. "The shadow lingered strong here." A soft rustling sounded ahead, not threatening, merely hesitant. A small doe stepped onto the path, her eyes wide, ears flicking. She took one tentative step toward Radagast, then another. He knelt, extending a gentle hand. "It is safe now," he whispered. But as he touched her, she trembled, more than a startled deer should. Her breath came ragged, her muscles tensed beneath her fur. The mists had touched her too deeply. He felt the taint still upon her, faint but lingering, like a bruise upon her spirit. "Easy, little one," Radagast murmured. A soft light flowed from his hand, warm as late summer sun. The doe's trembling eased. She blinked slowly, then nuzzled his palm. When she stepped back, the wild panic in her eyes had melted into calm. With a graceful leap, she disappeared among the trees. LOTR exhaled. "I had not thought the mists could wound so gently." "Subtle wounds can fester just as deep," Radagast replied. "The forest will recover, but it must be watched." The path rose again, and soon the dark heart of the forgotten forest lay behind them. The air grew warmer. Light filtered more freely through the canopy. Even the leaves seemed greener than before. But when they reached a narrow ridge overlooking a stretch of woods to the west, LOTR halted sharply. "Radagast, look there." Radagast followed his gaze. In a distant glade, a patch of mist, only a small one, scarcely the size of a cottage, still clung stubbornly to the earth. It did not drift, it did not break. It merely hovered, coiled thickly between the trunks. Radagast's expression tightened. LOTR spoke quietly. "I thought we had ended it." "So did I," Radagast said. "But shadows do not part easily. The creature was only the heart of the corruption, not the hand that stirred it." LOTR looked sharply at him. "What stirs such things?" Radagast turned away from the sight, resuming his steady pace. His tone, though calm, carried a weight that made LOTR follow quickly without further questions. "Many things stir in Middle-earth," he said, "some subtle, some bold. Powers long silent whisper again. Old evils test their chains, even lesser spirits feel the tremor." The hunter shivered. "If this is only a tremor, I dread what the storm will be." Radagast did not answer. The forest guided them onward, its paths now clearer, its air easier to breathe. They crossed a shallow stream where the water ran bright once more, freed of the murk that had clouded it. LOTR drank deeply, wiping his mouth with a satisfied sigh. But Radagast remained on the bank, staring at the ripples. "Something troubles you," LOTR said, rising. Radagast tapped the water with his staff. The ripples shimmered in a strange, uneven pattern, subtle but unmistakable to one who knew the forest well. "The shadow's breath has sunk deep," he murmured. "More deeply than I feared. Even now, faint traces linger beneath the earth." LOTR straightened. "Then we must root them out." "No," Radagast said, "not today. To cleanse the entire forest will take time, and strength, and knowledge I must gather afresh." They continued, pressing westward, but unease shadowed their steps. For though the forest felt lighter, some distant weight pressed upon Radagast's spirit, like a whisper just out of reach, a question without an answer. Hours passed. At sunset, the trees thinned, giving way to gentler woods familiar to the hunter. LOTR paused, breathing in the night air. "We are nearly free of the forest's grasp," he said. "And yet," Radagast murmured, "its memory will follow us." He lifted his staff. The woodland shadows at their backs rippled as though stirred by a fading breath. A faint echo rose from deep within the forest, not a cry, not a word, but a distant stirring, unused, ancient, a warning. LOTR looked back uneasily. "What was that?" "The forest," Radagast replied quietly, "calling to itself, healing its wounds." He lowered his staff and set his gaze toward the distant glow of the western horizon. "Come," he said. "Night draws near, and Rosgobel waits, but our journey is not yet done." And as they walked into the gathering dusk, the last traces of the mist curled through the trees behind them, thin, reluctant, as though reluctant to leave, and vanished into the night. Night had fallen fully by the time Radagast and LOTR neared the western bounds of the forgotten forest. The stars glimmered faintly through breaks in the canopy, shy and pale after so many days of obscuring mist. An owl hooted from a high branch, its voice clear, strong, and blessedly ordinary. It brought a small smile to Radagast's weary face. "Your friends return," LOTR said, nodding toward the owl. "Aye," Radagast murmured. "Their silence worried me more than any shadow." Yet despite the forest's slow healing, a hollow unease gnawed at him. The sealed creature had been only a fragment, a sliver of a broken spirit that posed little danger alone, but something had roused it. Something had strengthened it. The mists alone could not have done so. As they walked, LOTR spoke softly, as though hesitant to break the natural quiet. "When we return, will you warn the woodmen? They will want to know the forest is safe." Radagast nodded. "I shall, though the truth will weigh heavily upon them. The forest will mend, but only with time. They must tread with care and avoid the eastern glades for many days yet." LOTR accepted this with a simple bow of his head. "I will carry the warning myself." Radagast glanced at him with mild admiration. Few woodmen would willingly return to the mists, even to deliver news. but LOTR had shown no hesitation. "Your people will be glad of your courage," Radagast said. LOTR shrugged lightly. "Courage is easier to find when others depend upon it." Radagast chuckled. "Wisely spoken." They pressed onward. The path widened, then climbed a gentle rise. At its crest, the trees opened suddenly, revealing a small moonlit meadow. Fireflies drifted lazily through the air, blinking like scattered stars. The sight eased even Radagast's troubled heart. Then LOTR stopped short. "Radagast! There!" Near the far edge of the clearing, beneath the boughs of a great oak, stood the form of a man, motionless, cloaked in shadow. Only the faint glint of moonlight on a metal clasp revealed his presence. Radagast raised his staff slightly, but did not summon its glow. "Do not startle him," he murmured. "He may be wounded." They approached slowly. The figure did not move. His posture was rigid, one arm hanging unnaturally at his side. LOTR's hand drifted toward his bow. "Sir?" Radagast called gently. "Are you in need of aid?" No answer. They drew closer. The hair rose on LOTR's arms. Something in the air around the stranger felt wrong, cold and heavy, like stepping again into the underground chamber. Radagast sensed it as well. He lifted his staff. "Stand back," he whispered to LOTR. The man's head jerked up. His eyes glowed with faint, milky whiteness, like candlelight seen through frosted glass. His face was pale, drawn, and streaked with gray dust, yet no breath came from his lips. LOTR whispered, "He's dead?" "No," Radagast said grimly. "Not yet." The man's hand rose, trembling as though moved by invisible strings. His voice creaked forth, strained, brittle, barely human. "Help me." Before either could respond, his body convulsed. A tendril of faint gray mist seeped from his mouth, curling upward like smoke from dying embers. His knees buckled, and he collapsed. Radagast rushed to him, kneeling. LOTR hovered close, horror etched upon his face. "Is he one of your folk?" Radagast asked. LOTR leaned in. "Aye, Corlin, one of the hunters who vanished days ago." Radagast laid a hand upon the man's brow. It was cold, cold as stone, yet a weak pulse fluttered beneath his skin. "The mists touched him deeply," Radagast said. "But this is no simple poisoning. He bears the shadow's mark." The tendril of mist that rose from Corlin's lips wavered, then drifted toward the forest's edge. Radagast quickly waved his staff, dispersing it, but the mist resisted for a heartbeat longer than it should have. LOTR clenched his fists. "Tell me he can be healed." Radagast frowned deeply. "I cannot yet say. The corruption in him is not natural. It is tied to the sealed spirit, and to whatever stirred it awake." He placed both hands upon Corlin's chest and whispered low, ancient words. A soft warmth flowed from his palms, sinking into the man's body. Corlin twitched, gasping, then fell still. The frosted glaze faded from his eyes, replaced by a dull, unfocused weariness. He still breathed. Radagast sighed. He is safe for the moment, but he must be brought to shelter. The forest is not finished with its clearing, and more dangers may linger. LOTR bent swiftly, lifting Corlin onto his back with practiced ease. "Then we go. Quickly!" They moved westward once more, but now the forest felt less welcoming. The trees whispered faintly in the night breeze, not with fear, but with warning. Even the fireflies drifted away from their path, scattering toward the darkness as though pushed by an unseen hand. Radagast felt it too, a presence, faint but unmistakable, watching, listening. They descended along a narrow slope and crossed a shallow creek, glowing silver in the moonlight. The water's voice was soft and familiar, yet something beneath its gentle murmur stirred uneasily, as if the forest itself held its breath. At last, they reached a cluster of ancient cedars where the air grew still. LOTR faltered beneath Corlin's weight, breathing hard. "We must stop, Radagast. He grows heavier with every step." Radagast nodded. "Set him down gently." LOTR laid Corlin upon a patch of moss. The man stirred weakly, his eyes fluttering open. "LOTR." "I'm here," the hunter said, kneeling beside him. Corlin's lips trembled. The mist followed us. Voices in the dark. Radagast leaned close. "What voices?" Corlin struggled, his breath ragged. "Not words, a pulling, dragging us deeper." Men vanished. I could not turn back. Then his eyes rolled, and he fell unconscious once more. Radagast's expression darkened. This was no stray corruption. Something called to them, something far beyond the shadow we sealed. LOTR's voice tightened. What could call to a lost spirit? Radagast lifted his gaze toward the sky, where clouds passed swiftly across the moon, too swiftly for natural wind. "Only a power greater than the fragment we faced," he said softly. "A will still hidden in the east, but its reach grows bold." He stood, leaning on his staff, his face grave. Whatever stirred in the depths of this forest, it was not done of its own accord. The cedars rustled, though no breeze passed, and Radagast knew, with a cold certainty, that the shadow they bound was but the first whisper of a greater darkness beginning to rouse in Middle-earth. The night deepened around them, settling upon the cedars like a dark veil. Every branch seemed to hold its breath, as though the forest itself leaned close to listen. Radagast stood over Corlin's still form, the tip of his staff glowing faintly with a warm, amber hue. LOTR waited at his side, tense as a drawn bowstring. "We cannot rest here long," Radagast murmured. "The air carries old whispers, and Corlin is still bound to them." "Then where?" LOTR asked. "He cannot be moved far. If he wakes in panic, he could harm himself." Radagast glanced toward the north. "There is a grove beyond these cedars, a place the forest remembers well. Its roots run deep and true. Shadow will not easily reach us there." LOTR lifted Corlin carefully onto his shoulders once more. "Then lead the way." They moved quietly beneath the moonlit canopy, following a winding deer trail scarcely visible among the leaves. The forest around them shifted with soft rustlings, the cautious stirrings of beasts returning to their nightly wanderings. Yet here and there, pockets of stillness remained, like bruises on the night, remnants of the lingering mists. Radagast felt each one as they passed, faint chills brushing across his spirit like cold fingers dragging through water. After some time, the trees parted into a sheltered hollow, ringed by ancient birches. Their white trunks gleamed softly in the moonlight, standing like silent guardians. At the center of the grove lay a pool, shallow, clear, and still as glass. Fireflies drifted above it, lending a gentle golden glow to the hollow. LOTR sighed with relief. "This place, it feels different." "It is older than the forest around it," Radagast said. "Even the mists fear to enter." LOTR laid Corlin near the pool's edge. The man stirred faintly, his breath easing as though the very air soothed him. Radagast knelt beside him, dipping his fingers into the pool. The water was cool and pure. A faint sparkle danced across its surface when struck by the moonlight. "Let him drink," Radagast said. With gentle care, LOTR tilted Corlin's head. Radagast cupped water in his hands and let it trickle into the wounded hunter's mouth. Corlin swallowed weakly, a bit of color returning to his face. Radagast frowned. The forest protected this place. It may grant him strength enough to resist the corruption. LOTR sat back, wiping sweat from his brow. You speak of corruption as one speaks of a sickness. Can it be cured? Some wounds of spirit may be mended, Radagast replied softly. Others may be eased, though not undone. But what grips Corlin is neither spirit alone nor flesh alone. It is a tether, a remnant of the fragment we bound. LOTR stiffened. Then he is still in danger. As are we all, Radagast said. Yet fear will not serve us. Knowledge will. He rose and moved toward the trees, studying their trunks, brushing a hand across the ancient birch bark. The grove hummed faintly with a hidden music. Radagast closed his eyes, letting his thoughts reach into the roots beneath. He felt warmth there, old warmth, as if embers long buried still glowed faintly. This grove had once been a place of gathering for the earliest woodmen, a sanctuary for their healers. The stones beneath the soil still carried their whispers. LOTR watched him quietly. Do you sense something? Radagast opened his eyes. The forest watches us from afar. It knows a darkness passed this way. It seeks assurance that the danger is ended. He walked back to Corlin, kneeling beside him. Let us see what memories cling to him. LOTR's jaw tightened. Will it harm him? No more than the shadow itself already has. I seek not to pry, but to free him. Radagast placed his fingertips lightly upon Corlin's brow and spoke a word that glimmered faintly in the air. The grove dimmed. The silvery light upon the pool stilled, as though frozen mid-ripple. Corlin's breath shuddered. His eyelids fluttered. A thin tendril of mist rose once more from his lips, but this time Radagast caught it before it could drift away, cupping it gently with unseen force. The wisp trembled, taking on the faint outline of a face, twisted, strained, and voiceless. LOTR recoiled. What is that? A memory, Radagast murmured, not his own, placed upon him by the shadow. The wisp flickered, then dissolved into fragments of pale smoke. Radagast's face tightened. Something reached for him, even as we reached the well. Not the fragment, something else. Corlin's eyes opened suddenly. He gasped, coughing violently, and LOTR rushed to steady him. Easy, Radagast said, lowering his hand. You are safe here. Corlin blinked, his gaze unfocused. Where am I? In the birch grove, LOTR answered. We found you in the clearing. Corlin swallowed, trembling. The mists, they called to us, not with words, with dreams. Shadows in the dark, shapes moving just beyond sight, and a voice, far away but strong enough to pull us from the path. I tried to run, but I could not find the way out. Radagast leaned close. Did you see the shape? Describe it if you can. Corlin shivered violently. No shape, only a feeling, like something watching from a great distance. Cold, patient, waiting. Radagast exchanged a grim glance with LOTR. He speaks true. The shadow we bound was only a fragment of an older malice. Something beyond these woods stirred it awake. Corlin sagged back, exhausted. I cannot remember more. That is enough, Radagast said gently. Rest now. Corlin closed his eyes, his breathing slow and even. LOTR walked a short distance away, gripping his bow tightly. Do you know what stalks the east? Radagast walked toward the edge of the grove, his eyes reflecting the moonlight in troubled glimmers. I have suspicions, but suspicion is not truth. There are whispers among the wise, talk of movements in lands long shunned. He looked toward the far horizon, where the faintest glow hinted at distant mountains. Mirkwood darkens again. Strange creatures wander its borders. Spiders multiply in the north. The greenwood is fading, not destroyed, but troubled. It is as though a distant storm stirs the air. Lothar's jaw worked silently, his gaze fixed on the ground. My people are small folk, Radagast. We have no armies, no walls. If darker times come, you will not face them alone, Radagast said firmly. Remember that. Lothar nodded, but worry still crossed his face. They returned to the grove, where Corlin slept peacefully beneath the birches. Radagast settled beside him, leaning against a broad root. The night's long labors weighed heavily upon him. We shall remain until dawn, he said softly. The light will strengthen him, and me as well. Lothar laid his cloak across Corlin's chest, then sat nearby, watching the forest with sharp eyes. Sleep if you wish, Radagast said. I'll take first watch, Lothar replied. Radagast closed his eyes. The grove hummed with gentle life. The faint rustling of leaves lulled him toward rest. But as sleep drifted close, a whisper, soft, cold, and far away, brushed the edge of his thoughts. You seal one door, but many stand open. Radagast's eyes snapped open. The grove was unchanged. The pool still glimmered. Lothar kept silent watch. But Radagast knew that whisper had not been imagined, and he feared that before long, the first door would not be the last they must close in Middle-earth. Dawn crept slowly into the birch grove, pale gold spilling across the roots and stones like a thin ribbon of hope. The air grew warmer, the shadows gentler, and the lingering chill of night eased its grip. Birds stirred among the branches, their morning songs weaving through the grove like threads of light after a long, troubled dream. Radagast rose from where he had rested against an ancient root. His limbs ached with weariness, but the forest's quiet strength had renewed him somewhat. Lothar sat nearby, eyes red with sleeplessness, but steady as he watched over Corlin, who still lay upon the moss, breathing evenly. He slept through the night, Lothar said softly. No more tremors, no whispering mist. I think he is recovering. Radagast knelt beside the wounded hunter. Corlin's color had improved. The gray pallor had faded from his cheeks. Yet when Radagast touched his forehead, a faint sting, like a cold spark, darted along his fingers. The corruption wanes, Radagast murmured, but does not yet depart. Lothar frowned deeply. What holds it? Fear, Radagast said, and memory. Shadows cling most tightly to wounds that stir the heart. Corlin suddenly stirred, blinking awake as though roused from a deep and troubled slumber. He stared up at the canopy, confusion clouding his eyes before recognition dawned. Lothar, Master Radagast, I thought I dreamt this grove. You are safe, Lothar said, offering him water. Rest now. We will bring you to the woodmen soon. Corlin drank weakly, then nodded. I can walk if needed. No, Radagast said gently. You will walk when the forest allows it. He rose and stepped to the pool's edge, gazing into the still water. The reflection that greeted him seemed older, more worn than he remembered. The night's revelations had etched themselves upon him like quiet runes. Lothar approached. Radagast, about the whisper you sensed, the voice that reached to Corlin, what manner of thing could it be? Radagast did not answer at once. He dipped the tip of his staff into the pool, watching thin ripples spread outward across the surface. The reflections trembled, trees bending, light wavering, yet beneath them lay a deeper stillness. A shadow does not stir without cause, Radagast said at last. The creature we bound was broken, too weak to call the mists by its own power. Something awakened it, a distant will, a cold one. Lothar tightened his grip on his bow. Do you speak of the necromancer? Radagast's expression darkened, though he kept his voice calm. There are whispers, sightings in the south of Mirkwood. lights flickering in Dol Guldur, rumors among birds that refuse to fly near its ruins. Yet no one may name the necromancer with certainty. He vanished years ago, or so it is hoped. But you do not think he is gone? Radagast sighed. I do not know, and that troubles me more than any certainty. If the necromancer stirs again, even in secret, all the greenwood may suffer. His eyes lingered on Corlin. This corruption bears the touch of something patient and watchful, something that tests the edges of the world's strength. The wind stirred softly, rustling the birch leaves. Radagast listened, brows furrowed, as though the breeze itself carried counsel from distant places. At length, he turned again toward LOTR. We will not linger here. Corlin must be brought to your people, and I must speak with them, urge caution, warn them of the forest's shifting nature. LOTR nodded. They will listen. Radagast smiled faintly. They listen to you, LOTR, and that is a rare gift among mortal folk. LOTR flushed but made no reply. Instead, he helped Corlin sit upright. The wounded man winced, gripping LOTR's arm for support. Give me a moment, Corlin murmured. The world still swims before me. Radagast placed a hand on his shoulder. Do not force yourself. The forest will give you strength as we walk. Slowly, carefully, Corlin pushed himself to his feet. His legs trembled, but he remained standing. LOTR stayed close, ready to catch him should he falter. When Corlin steadied himself, they left the grove. The birches seemed to bow subtly as they passed, their leaves whispering softly in farewell. The forest beyond was brighter now. Sunlight pierced the canopy in slender beams, gilding the path in warm gold. Birds darted between branches. Squirrels chattered irritably from above, as though angry at the long, silent nights they had endured. Corlin marveled at it. It feels as though the forest awoke with me. It heals with you, Radagast replied. Both were wounded by the same shadow. They followed a winding trail westward. With every step, the corruption grew fainter. Radagast felt it in the earth, the roots less tense, the leaves less brittle. The mists no longer clung stubbornly, but drifted away on the breeze like retreating spirits. Yet the weight upon Radagast's heart did not lessen. After some time, they crossed a narrow ravine where a fallen spruce formed a natural bridge. LOTR crossed first, followed by Corlin. As Radagast stepped onto the trunk, a sudden tremor quivered through the earth. He stopped at once. Radagast? LOTR called from the far side. Radagast knelt, pressing a hand to the bark. The tremor came again, soft, fleeting, like a whisper moving through the roots deep beneath. Not hostile, not malignant, but warning. Radagast stood and crossed quickly. We must not tarry. The forest urges us onward. They continued with renewed haste. Corlin leaned heavily upon LOTR, yet he did not falter. The trees grew familiar, less twisted, their branches arching naturally. The faint outlines of distant hills rose ahead. Then, as they reached a bend in the path, the forest grew still. Radagast stopped. LOTR followed his gaze and froze. Before them, sprawled across the path, lay the carcass of a stag. Its eyes were open, glassy. Its fur bristled with frost. Not the frost of winter, but a thin, unnatural rime that glittered under the sunlight like shards of frozen mist. Corlin gasped. By the stars! Radagast crouched beside the animal. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle, only the cold mark of something that had touched it, briefly, yet fatally. The shadow's breath, Radagast murmured. It touched this creature only hours ago. LOTR stepped back, unease washing across his face. But we sealed the spirit last night. Aye, Radagast said. Yet the mists that answered its call roam still. They are weaker, but not gone. Corlin trembled. Then others may yet fall to it. Radagast rose, gripping his staff. No, we will stop it before the day is done. A gust of wind swept through the trees. The leaves shivered, and far in the distance, faint as a dying echo, a thin ribbon of mist drifted between the roots. Lothar's jaw tightened. Radagast, the mists are fleeing. No, Radagast whispered. They are searching, seeking any remnant of the shadow's will. He turned to his companions, eyes determined. We end this today, before it finds what it seeks. And together, beneath the brightening morning sky, they set off into the woods once more, toward the lingering breath of a darkness that refused to die quietly. The lingering mist drifted westward, like a wounded serpent fleeing the light. Thin and ragged though it had become, it wound through the underbrush with chilling purpose. Radagast strode after it, his staff held firmly in hand, Lothar close behind, and Corlin leaning heavily on the hunter's shoulder. Sunlight filtered through the high branches, bright enough to warm the earth, but not strong enough to banish the veil that crept ahead of them. Radagast moved at a steady pace, though weariness tugged at his limbs. The mists weaken, he said quietly, yet they cling to whatever remnant remains of the shadow's will. Corlin shivered. I can still feel it, like a faint whisper behind my thoughts. Not words, but a pull. Radagast nodded gravely. You carry its mark still. That is why the mists linger. They are drawn to you, hoping to feed upon the trace that remains. Lothar halted at once, shifting Corlin behind him. Then we must keep them from him. We shall, Radagast assured. But driving the mists away will not end this. We must sever their link to the fragment once and for all. The trail curved beneath ancient firs whose scent filled the air with a sharp, resinous tang. The forest here was older, the trunks wide and deeply grooved. Though the shadow had not touched them as strongly, a quiet tension lingered, as if the trees themselves sensed unwelcome guests creeping through their roots. Ahead, the fleeing ribbon of mist thickened briefly, then slipped between two great stones half buried in moss. Radagast frowned as he approached them. Lothar followed his gaze. What troubles you? These stones, Radagast murmured. They were placed here long ago, not by chance. The stones were tall, narrow slabs of gray rock, weathered yet standing in perfect alignment. Old carvings clung faintly to their surfaces, spirals, runes, and crude images of beasts and trees. Between them lay a narrow passage, dark and shadowed, where the mist coiled like a beckoning finger. Corlin stared at the stones with wide eyes. I know this place, he whispered. My grandfather spoke of it. The Duvath Gate, the Door of Shadows, a place the woodmen avoided, for their elders said strange dreams came to any who slept near it. Radagast knelt, brushing moss from one stone's lower edge. The carvings beneath were faint, but still legible to one who knew the old tongues. A warding, he murmured. Broken long ago. These gates once barred the passage of unseen things. Lothar stiffened. Then the mists have found a path meant to be sealed? Aye, Radagast said. And more worrying still, these stones were not set by woodmen. They are far older, perhaps from the earliest years after the world's shaping. A breeze swept through the passage, carrying with it the faint scent of cold and stone. The mist curled deeper into the shadows. Radagast rose and looked to Corlin. Does this place stir memory? Corlin pressed a hand to his brow. Not memory, fear. I saw these stones in the dream where the mists called to us. They shone red, like embers, and beyond them I felt something waiting. Radagast's face tightened. Then the fragment sought this place as well. It knew the way. He stepped forward. "Wait," LOTR said. "If the shadow knew this place, then more danger may lie beyond those stones." Radagast placed a hand on the hunter's shoulder. "You speak truth, but danger left to grow unattended may one day become peril beyond healing. If this is the path the shadow tried to claim, we must follow it before it strengthens again." LOTR drew a steadying breath, then nodded. "We go with you." Radagast regarded Corlin. The wounded man straightened weakly. "I can still walk, and I will not let the shadow use me further." Radagast gave a somber nod. "Stay close. Do not stray from my side." They entered the passage between the stones. The moment they crossed the threshold, the forest's bright life dimmed behind them. Light thinned. The air cooled. The scent of moss and fir faded, replaced by damp earth and ancient stone. The path narrowed between rising walls of rock draped in dark roots that seemed to cling to the surfaces like skeletal fingers. The mist gathered ahead, thicker and denser, as though afraid to go further, yet unwilling to abandon its purpose. Radagast raised his staff, and its warm glow spread outward, illuminating the passage. Strange carvings lined the stone walls, faded scenes of battles between shadowy forms and figures bearing staves of light. In one carving, a tall pillar stood beneath ancient trees, bound by chains of runes. Radagast traced the design with his fingertips. "This place once held watch against wandering spirits," he said softly, "but its guardians have long vanished." LOTR glanced about nervously. "If the guardians are gone, what remains in their stead?" "A memory," Radagast answered, "and perhaps something more." They moved deeper until the passage opened suddenly into a hollowed chamber beneath the earth. Roots twisted across the ceiling. The chamber floor sloped downward, ending in a small depression filled with shallow water. The mist hovered above it, restless, pulsing faintly like a dying ember. Radagast lifted his staff. "This is where the last breath of corruption hides." Corlin sagged against LOTR, gasping. His eyes glazed briefly, then he whispered, "I feel it again. It seeks me." Radagast stepped forward. "Hold him. Do not let him fall." The mist shivered, then drifted toward Corlin, stretching thin tendrils like searching hands. Radagast thrust his staff into the earth. A burst of golden light swept across the chamber, driving the mist backward. It recoiled with a faint hiss, retreating toward the water-filled hollow. Radagast approached slowly, speaking words that filled the chamber with a soft, resonant hum. The mist trembled. Then, from the water's surface, a faint red glimmer rose. LOTR drew his bow. Corlin clutched his chest in pain. Radagast's eyes hardened. A fragment of its will remains. Not the spirit itself, but the echo. The mists sought this place to reawaken it. The red glimmer brightened, faint, wavering, but unmistakably hostile. Radagast struck his staff upon the stone. "Begone!" he commanded, his voice echoing like thunder in the hollow. "Your master is broken. Your path is closed. Return to the silence from which you came." Golden light surged outward in a sweeping arc. The mist writhed. The red embers flickered, fought, then snapped like strings pulled too tight. A piercing wail flooded the hollow, thin as wind through dead leaves. Then, silence. The mist shattered into fading wisps, drifting harmlessly into the earth. The red light vanished. The chamber brightened, freed from the oppressive weight that had hung over it. Corlin collapsed, breath easing as though a stone had lifted from his chest. LOTR knelt beside him, Radagast exhaled slowly, lowering his staff. The chamber felt lighter now, cleansed. The stones along the walls no longer loomed, but seemed to sigh with relief. "It is finished," Radagast said. Lothar studied him. "Truly finished?" Radagast nodded. "The last remnant is gone. The forest will know peace again." Corlin looked up weakly. "Then we may return home?" "Aye," Radagast said with a gentle smile. "The shadows have lost their hold upon you." Corlin closed his eyes in exhausted relief, but Radagast turned toward the carved walls once more, and deeper shadows crossed his features. "For now," he murmured to himself. And though the chamber was quiet, he felt, far away, faint as distant thunder, the stirring of something greater, patient and hidden. Not here, not now, but soon. The return journey through the forest began in solemn quiet. The air felt lighter, the tension in the branches eased, and even the earth beneath their boots carried a gentler rhythm. Yet Radagast walked with a lingering heaviness, for though the last remnant of the shadow had been cleansed, deeper questions stirred in his heart like unsettled embers. Corlin leaned on Lothar, but walked with firmer steps than before. His breath came steadily now, and the dimness that once clouded his eyes had all but vanished. Still, his face bore the look of one who carried memories he wished he could cast away as easily as fallen leaves. They followed a sloping trail beneath a canopy of tall pines. Sunlight filtered through in dancing patches, glimmering upon the moss. A small group of sparrows flitted overhead, chattering with bright voices, as if celebrating the forest's recovery. Lothar tilted his head toward them. "Your friends seem pleased." Radagast smiled faintly. "They rejoice at every dawn, but this morning they sing with clearer throats. Their dread is lifting." "And yours?" Lothar asked quietly. Radagast made no answer. His silence spoke clearly enough. They walked on until the pines thinned and the forest opened into a long, fern-covered slope. At its crest stood a familiar outcrop of stone from which one could glimpse the distant woodman settlements. The sight of it eased Corlin's tense shoulders. "We are nearly home," he murmured. "Indeed," Radagast said, "but before you return to your people, there is something we must do." Lothar glanced at him with raised brows. "What remains?" Radagast motioned toward a small clearing that opened to their left, bathed in soft light. "Come, the forest has something to show us." They left the main path and stepped into the clearing. It was small, ringed by tall elms whose leaves whispered gently in the breeze. At the center grew a young oak, strong already for its age, its roots gripping the soil firmly. Radagast approached it and knelt at its base. The roots emanated a faint warmth, like sunlight trapped beneath the earth. He pressed a hand to the soil and breathed slowly. "I asked the forest to remember," he said at last, "and it listens now." Corlin and Lothar exchanged bewildered glances. Radagast rose. "This is a place where the memory of the mists lingers. Its trace is faint, little more than a shadow of a shadow, but I must be certain it leaves no seed behind." He tapped the ground lightly with his staff. A soft tremor rippled outward across the clearing. The earth stirred. Lothar reached for his bow, but Radagast raised a hand. "Peace. This is no foe." From beneath the soil, a curl of pale mist leaked upward, thin, weary, barely alive. It drifted like a lost breath, caught in the light. Radagast lifted his staff, and golden radiance swept forth, catching the wisp gently. The mist trembled. "What is it?" Corlin asked uneasily. "A memory without a will," Radagast explained. "Only the echo of the fear that once filled this forest. Harmless now, but sorrow lingers in it." The mist curled helplessly as Radagast drew it toward a stone at the clearing's edge. an old flat stone marked by natural grooves. The wisp touched the stone and dissolved instantly, drawn harmlessly into the earth. Radagast lowered his staff. And so the last breath of shadow leaves these woods. LOTR exhaled long. Then it truly is done. Yes, Radagast said. The forest is free again. Yet even as he spoke the words, his eyes drifted to the east. The sunlight did not quite reach the far horizon, where the trees grew darker. The faintest trace of a distant gloom hung there. No mist now, but a heaviness, like a storm gathering beyond sight. The wind shifted, carrying a scent Radagast knew too well. Cold stone, old fear, Dol Guldur. He closed his eyes briefly. Nothing had stirred from that place for many years, but his heart whispered otherwise. The wise had long suspected that its silence was not peace but preparation. LOTR approached him quietly. You sense something. Radagast opened his eyes. A whisper, a tremor far deeper than any caused by the mists. It lies beyond these woods, but it moves all the same. Does it threaten us? Radagast looked at Corlin, then at LOTR, then at the forest that now breathed freely again. Not today, he said softly, but one day perhaps. They resumed their journey. As they descended the fern-covered slope, a family of deer emerged from the shadows, crossing their path with graceful ease. Corlin paused, breath catching in his throat. It is as though they welcome us, he murmured. It is gratitude, Radagast said. The forest knows when evil leaves its heart. Before long, they reached the boundary of the woodman's lands. Smoke rose from distant hearths, curling gently into the morning sky. Children's voices drifted faintly across the fields, mingled with the barking of dogs and the sound of axes splitting wood. Corlin's eyes filled. Home! I feared I might never see it again. LOTR clapped him on the shoulder. Your tale will be one told for many winters. Tell it truthfully, Radagast said, but with care. Fear spreads more swiftly than shadow. As they neared the first cluster of wooden huts, shapes emerged to greet them. Men and women ran forward, calling out in disbelief and joy at the sight of Corlin. A young woman, his wife, as LOTR quietly whispered, threw her arms around him, weeping freely. Corlin's voice trembled. I am home. Radagast watched the reunion with a warm but wistful smile. Such moments, small as they seemed, were victories worth guarding. A tall, broad-shouldered woodman approached. Harloth, chieftain of the settlement. His stern expression softened when he saw Corlin, but his gaze soon turned to Radagast. What tidings from the east? He asked. Radagast bowed his head respectfully. The forest was troubled by a lingering shadow. But it is cleansed now. Your hunters may return to their work in safety. Harloth let out a slow breath. We are in your debt, Radagast of Rosgobel. Not to me alone, Radagast said. LOTR's courage played no small part, and Corlin's endurance as well. Harloth placed a firm hand on LOTR's shoulder. Your bravery honors us. LOTR glanced down, modest but proud. I did only what was needed. Radagast's eyes softened. Often, that is the greatest courage of all. He turned to leave, but Harloth's voice halted him. Will the forest remain safe? Radagast hesitated. Then he answered, Yes, but remain watchful. Old powers stir beyond the trees. The world shifts, though the reason remains hidden. Harloth nodded grimly. We will heed your warning. As Radagast and LOTR stepped away, leaving Corlin among his people, a cool breeze swept across the settlement. Radagast gazed once more toward the dark line of distant trees. A faint shadow, tiny as a drifting cloud, moved across the edge of the forest. Radagast narrowed his eyes. The mists were gone, but the world beyond was entering a new season, and somewhere, in the deep places of Middle-earth, a will long silent began to whisper again. For a time, Radagast remained among the woodmen, observing Corlin's recovery and speaking quietly with their healers. The settlement, simple huts of timber and thatch, surrounded by palisades of stout logs, bustled with renewed life. Hunters returned to their rounds, mothers gathered herbs at the forest's edge, and children laughed as they chased one another with wooden staves. All appeared well. Yet Radagast felt a restlessness beneath the calm, like a faint, distant drumbeat echoing through the roots of the forest. He walked often alone, pacing the settlement's border, listening to the quiet language of branch and leaf. The trees now whispered contentedly, but every so often a chill ripple shuddered through a stand of pines, or an aspen's leaves quivered without wind. On the third morning, as Radagast stood watching a kestrel wheel across the sky, LOTR approached. "You have scarcely slept," the hunter said. "Even the birds remark upon it." Radagast chuckled softly. "Do they? Then I must be more careful." But LOTR shook his head. "No, they care for you, and I see the truth in your eyes. Something weighs upon your thoughts." Radagast exhaled, leaning on his staff. "The forest is cleansed, but the world beyond is not." The mists were a whisper, LOTR, a tremor of something greater. LOTR frowned, but did not interrupt. Radagast continued. "Since the fragment's stirring, the trees speak of odd movements in the south. Unquiet paths, creatures wandering where none should roam. I have heard similar murmurs from birds, sparrows that fled Mirkwood's deeper shadows, owls who avoid certain ruins." Lothar's face hardened. "Dol Guldur." "Aye," Radagast murmured. "A place once abandoned. Yet now it feels watched again, like a bare hill before a storm." A call rang out behind them. Corlin approached, walking unaided. His steps were slow but steady. A new brightness filled his eyes, as though the burden upon his spirit had finally lifted. "You are both up early," he said. "The settlement still sleeps." "Radagast rises with dawn," LOTR replied. "And long before dawn, if the birds permit it." Corlin smiled faintly, then sobered. "Master Radagast, I feel I owe you more than words. You pulled me from a darkness I cannot name." "You owe me nothing," Radagast said warmly. "It was your own strength that carried you back. I merely cleared the path." Corlin shook his head. "I remember little of those days in the mists. Shadows chasing us, voices calling from nowhere. Yet one thing I recall clearly. A moment when all seemed lost, and I felt a warmth, brief but strong. It guided me, though I did not know where. That was your doing." Radagast offered a gentle bow. "If I lent a spark, then I am glad for it." The three stood for a moment in quiet companionship, the morning wind weaving through the pines like a soft refrain. Then Corlin looked toward the east, his expression clouded. "Do you truly believe greater dangers stir beyond our borders?" Radagast considered him long before answering. "I fear so. The world is changing, Corlin. Shadows shift and gather in places long silent. Even the smallest tremors reach far." Corlin set his jaw. "Then we will stand ready." Radagast placed a hand on his shoulder. "Courage such as yours will be needed in days to come." Later that morning, Radagast took leave of the settlement. Many came to thank him, mothers offering baskets of dried herbs, elders bowing their heads, children running to bring him woven garlands of grass and flowers. He thanked them kindly, though he took little for himself. LOTR accompanied him to the edge of the forest. They stood together beneath the eaves, where sunlight dappled the ground and the scent of pine resin drifted softly on the air. "I will travel with you as far as your path allows," LOTR said. "You have done much already," Radagast replied. "Your people need you now." "And you?" LOTR asked. "Do you need no one?" Radagast smiled, but the sadness behind it did not escape the hunter's notice. "A wizard seldom travels alone in truth. The world itself is my companion. I hear its voice in every leaf. But that does not mean it speaks comfort." "No," Radagast admitted. "Not always." Still, they walked together a while along the forest trail. Birds followed overhead, darting from branch to branch as if eager to keep him within sight. A fox trotted boldly beside them for several paces before vanishing into a thicket. At last, Radagast paused. "This is far enough, LOTR. I must turn north from here." The hunter bowed his head. "Thank you, Radagast, for saving Corlin, for saving the forest." "Watch over your people," Radagast said, "and trust your senses. If ever the shadows thicken again, send word to me." "I will." They clasped forearms in parting, then LOTR turned back toward the settlement. Radagast watched him go until he vanished among the trees. Then he sighed and set his path northward. The forest welcomed him like an old friend returning. Branches swayed gently overhead, brushing away the last clinging threads of shadow. Birds darted near, chirping rapidly as though arguing over whose territory he had entered first. Radagast chuckled, answering them in their own tongue, until their bickering softened into cheerful song. But after an hour's walk, the air grew quiet. Not ominous, simply watchful. Radagast slowed, his staff tapping lightly against the roots. A faint breeze rustled the treetops. Then, unexpectedly, a raven landed upon a low branch just ahead, staring at him with bright black eyes. "Ah," Radagast murmured, "you bring tidings." The raven croaked sharply, then fluttered its wings. In a coarse but intelligible voice it rasped, "From the north, strange scents, strange shapes. Wolves moving by daylight. Not right, not right." Radagast's brow furrowed. "Where?" The raven turned its head sharply east toward the dark line of distant hills. "Beyond the narrows, old paths, old shadows." Radagast bowed his head. "Thank you, my friend. Fly safely. Tell your kin to avoid that region." With a loud flap, the raven took wing and vanished into the canopy. Radagast stood still, listening. The forest whispered, not with fear, yet with unease. He resumed his path, walking deeper into the woods. Thoughts churned like leaves caught in a river's eddy. Wolves straying from old dens, strange shapes in the north, Dol Guldur's cold breath drifting across Mirkwood. And now, the whisper he had heard in the grove, faint but unmistakable. "You seal one door, but many stand open." Radagast gripped his staff more tightly. "If darkness rises again," he said quietly to the trees, "then we must be ready long before it reaches the green borders." A woodpecker tapped sharply on a trunk, as though offering its agreement. Radagast pressed onward. The sunlight dimmed as the forest thickened around him, the path narrowing, roots weaving across it like age-old scars. He walked unhurried, yet with certainty, his mind set not on Rosgobel alone, but on distant lands where shadows stretched long. The mists were gone. The forest was safe. But far to the south, and farther still to the east, a darker breath stirred the air, quiet, patient, and growing. And Radagast the Brown knew he could no longer ignore the gathering storm. Radagast's path wound northward through the deepening woods. where the day's golden light filtered softly among towering trunks. The forest, though recovering, bore the marks of its recent trial: fallen branches, withered ferns, and patches of soil still unsettled from the mist's passing. Yet life returned in cautious breaths. Warblers hopped among budding leaves, testing their voices, and small creatures rustled in thickets that only days before had lain silent beneath a pall of dread. With every step, Radagast felt his weariness lighten. The forest's strength seeped quietly into him, its calming pulse coursing through old roots and ancient memories. Yet the heavier weight upon his thoughts remained, lodged like a stone in deep water. The fragment sealed, the mists dispersed, Corlin saved. The forest was safe, but the whisper he had heard in the birch grove echoed still in the quiet corners of his mind. Many doors stand open. He walked until the trees parted, revealing a ridge overlooking a broad sweep of woodland. From here, the forest stretched like a living sea, its hues shifting from emerald to gold beneath the afternoon sun. The winds brushed its surface, sending a ripple across the treetops. Radagast paused, leaning upon his staff. To the west lay the lands of the woodmen, fields now bright with morning work, homes alive with laughter restored. To the north, the Dimril Dale slumbered beneath distant mountains. To the south, however, beyond the long shadows of southern greenwood, the horizon darkened. A line of forest too still, too heavy, a quiet place where light dimmed even under clear skies. Dal Guldur, once a fortress of watchful evil, then abandoned, or so the wise had believed. Yet now, he was no longer certain. Even the forest avoided that region, bending its branches subtly away, as if guided by instinct older than memory. A crow settled upon a branch beside him, its feathers ruffled by the breeze. It croaked twice, then peered at him with unsettling intelligence. "You bring tidings as well?" Radagast asked gently. The crow blinked, then uttered a rough phrase in its harsh voice. "Dark smoke, far off, not fire, no flame, but shadow rising." Radagast's breath tightened. "From where?" The crow tilted its head southeast, from the hill of the old ruin, the one of stone, cracked. Dal Guldur. Radagast nodded slowly. "Fly west, warn your kin, avoid the southern borders." The crow dipped its beak and soared into the sky, vanishing among the treetops. Radagast stood in stillness for a long moment. His cloak rustled softly, tugged by a wind carrying scents from far places: pine sap, river spray, and something faintly cold beneath. He turned away at last and continued down the slope toward Rosgobel. The path wound through a grove of great beeches whose silver bark glimmered faintly. Here, the forest had always held a peculiar stillness, not of fear, but of deep remembrance. As he passed beneath the heavy boughs, he heard a soft rustling as animals stirred, hedgehogs nosing out from the underbrush, hares lifting their long ears, fox cubs tumbling after their mother. They approached him without hesitation, brushing against his robes, chirping, squeaking, sniffing curiously. Radagast knelt among them, laughing softly. "Yes, yes, it is good to see you again, little ones." A sparrow hopped onto his shoulder. A mouse peeked from his sleeve. A dormouse climbed boldly onto his staff, blinking up at him. For a moment, all was peace. Yet even as he smiled, Radagast sensed the forest's deeper breath, steady now, healing, but aware of the tremors that ran far beneath the roots, whispers from distant hills. He stroked the sparrow gently. "Guard your nests. Warn me of any ill wind. Our work is not yet done." The small creatures chirped in agreement, scattering back into the foliage as Radagast rose. He followed the winding track until the familiar roof of Rosgobel came into view, nestled beneath protective bowers of evergreen. Moss grew thick upon its eaves, and dozens of tiny birdhouses hung from its branches, each painted with simple patterns of leaves and stars. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the scent of sage and dried applewood. Radagast felt a warmth in his chest. Home. Yet as he drew near, a faint shimmering in the air caught his eye, not threatening, but unusual. A thrush sat perched upon the windowsill, fluttering its wings anxiously. Radagast quickened his pace. "Peace, little one. What is it?" The thrush whistled hurriedly, delivering a sequence of sharp notes. Radagast listened, his face growing troubled. "A traveler? At my door?" The thrush bobbed its head rapidly. Radagast nodded. "Very well. We shall not keep them waiting." He pushed open the door. Inside, standing near the hearth, was a tall figure wrapped in gray robes. His beard was long and silver, his eyes keen beneath the deep brim of a pointed hat. Gandalf. Radagast halted at once. "Mithrandir, you arrive sooner than expected." Gandalf turned with a soft smile. "And I find you returning from toil, as ever." Radagast set aside his staff and approached. "I suspect you did not come merely for tea." "Ah," Gandalf chuckled, "though the thought does console me. But no, my friend, I come with tidings, dark tidings." Radagast felt the forest outside go still, as if leaning closer. Gandalf gestured for him to sit. "There are stirrings in the east, whispers of a shadow moving once more in places we believed long emptied. Strange creatures slip through borders under the moon. Hunters vanish in the south, and now ravens bring word of old halls awakening." Radagast's chest tightened. "Dol Guldur." Gandalf met his eyes gravely. "Yes, I fear it may not be as abandoned as once we hoped." Radagast bowed his head. "The mists here, the fragment we sealed, all point toward the same murmur. A gathering." Gandalf laid a hand upon his shoulder. "You have done well to cleanse this forest, but we must look beyond these trees. Dark times may come again, and we must be vigilant, patient, and swift in counsel." Radagast's voice was quiet. "I will stand ready." Gandalf smiled, sad, resolute. "As will we all." Outside, the wind rose softly, carrying the scent of pines and the whisper of distant hills. The forest breathed deeply, sensing change upon the far horizon. Radagast stepped to the doorway and gazed eastward, where the sky dimmed with early dusk. The forgotten forest slept peacefully now, freed from its mists. But beyond its borders, the world stirred. Old powers shifted in shadow. And though the tale of the mists had reached its end, a greater story was awakening. Radagast tightened his grip on his staff, shoulders firm with quiet resolve. "For whatever awaits," he murmured, "the forest will not stand alone." And thus ended the tale of the mists of the forgotten forest, but not the beginning of the shadows yet to rise.